So let's go through the team here. And I just want to get very brief summaries. What was your concept? So let's start with the first one, territorial reinforcement, territorial control. Who is in that group?
Me, Sara Elena from El Paso.
Sarah, please give us a summary in 8 words or less. What's territorial control?
Activating space and creating community ownership.
Whoa. Yay.
Word, incredible.
That's pretty amazing, actually. I'll give you a bit more. Did you want to expand about that? How do you do that? How do you create ownership of an area?
I can say it through an example. So I'm working on a trail that will be through the whole county and had historically been along unused canals. And, you know, you'd find beer bottles and, you know, things like that along the canal, but we're activating the space through an urban trail for pedestrians and cyclists. And then we created an ambassadors program for the trail so that people can, and a volunteer program. So the ambassadors will have, you know, access to reporting and things like that along the trail. And we also have activated the space for community events.
That's a great example. A lot of folks say when you have trails, what we call movement predictors, advanced septic basically calls it a predictor of movement from area to area with trails, walkways, stairways, elevators. That's what they're called, movement predictors. And one of the misconceptions about movement predictors is you can't establish territorial reinforcement because you have nobody nearby to watch them all the time, because the trail goes by all these different areas. We did a Rail to Trails project in San Mateo, California, a number of years ago, and it was coming from a train station. It was going through the hardcore gang areas. And the question was, if you have ownership of the trail there, how can you possibly get it there? And you'll never get ownership of the trail. Well, not necessarily. You can get ownership of the trail. You can get local folks to take ownership for one thing that way. And you can also do what you're saying, which is you can have ambassador programs. So there is ways to do this. It's complex, but you can do it. So thank you. Who had access control? Is it Leah? Please.
Yes, Addie and I did. Okay, so the 8-word was basically, it's kind of self-explanatory, controlling access points or thoughtfully deciding access points so that you are considering the desired uses, something like that.
Yeah. And the tactics like fencing, hedging, the doorways, access points in, and so forth. And you know, access is tricky. It's political right now because people are saying, oh, you know, all SEPTA does is keep some folks away from other folks. You know, like African American communities away from white communities, or poor folks from rich folks, or homeless people, and so forth. And you know what? They're right. That has been done by SEPTED too often. That's why we set up this International SEPTED Association and certification, is to stop that from happening, because any strategy can be used positively or negatively, depending on how it's used. And so access control can be a gated community where people have fences and walls and barbed wire in a gate. That's access control. Is it good access control? I don't think so. That's not what I think of when I think of a democratic city. But there are ways to do access control that are subtle, that are, I think the word you used was thoughtful. I think that's a great phrase for access control, is that, you know, if it's done thoughtfully and you make it owned by everybody, it can be a really powerful way to help folks work together. So does that make sense?
Would you be able to provide just a very quick example of a democratically created, or how you said something that it's owned by everybody and people have access, but you're still controlling access? What does that look like?
I can. I'm going to give you 2 case studies after our break. Can you wait for the case studies? Sarah?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and also hold me to account if I don't answer exactly your question. Come back at me at the end, and I'll do a better job.
Okay.
We had a really good example I can just briefly talk about. Was so bike lanes. A lot of times, you know, they're supposed to be for bikes, but cars may use them to drift in and out. So painting, like designating the bike lane green, or, you know, bollards or something, could be a way to control the access of cars out of bike lanes.
Oh, so access from cars to bike lanes. I see. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, and there's other kinds of access, people to people access, and so forth. So we'll come back to that. Okay. All right. Who did surveillance? Did anybody do surveillance? Natural surveillance? No one?
That was our group that didn't have folks in it. That ended up doing connectivity instead.
Okay. I'll do natural surveillance. I'll be the group. Okay. Natural surveillance.
Okay.
The word natural is really important because surveillance is like eyes on the street. That's what Jane Jacobs talked about, put eyes on the street. But there's ways to do that. Cameras put eyes on the street, but they're mechanical. And the problem with cameras, of course, is first of all, there needs to be somebody monitoring. Secondly, there needs to be a response. And thirdly, the people, if it's a gang member or whatever, they may not even care. I mean, every time I turn the TV on, it says, exclusive robbery caught in live on camera as the robber comes into the store. Well, if the camera was effective to prevent the robbery, I wouldn't be able to watch it. It would have prevented it already. So we say natural because when we say natural, we don't necessarily mean patrols by security or neighborhood watch. We means people can naturally see into an area and take ownership over the area. The example I used earlier was Starbucks putting the tables out so people look outside, but it can be much more natural than that. Having folks live near an area who maybe have their children playing in a play area and their windows face the play area so the mothers and the families can watch the children in the play area doing that. I'm going to give you a really good example of natural surveillance in a bike downtown area in Portland where they tried to protect the bikes from being stolen through natural surveillance. So in natural, the key natural is really important. And then when you get to doing natural surveillance with hedging and trimming and lighting and whatnot, then it'll make more sense. Okay, so that's natural surveillance. Image, who had image? Maintenance.
Image was myself and Hannah from Santa Fe and Yvonne from Chicago.
Okay, do one of you want to give it a shot and tell us what it is in 8 words or less?
Yeah, Yvonne, go for it.
No, Shannon, you did the notes.
Okay, I put demonstrating that the area is well loved and taken care of.
Okay, and how would you do that?
We discussed in Chicago near a transit center that a lot of the community felt unsafe accessing because of loitering and whatnot, that a tactic that was used was creating a mural, a community mural in the place, putting some trash cans in, and there's been work on lighting.
Yep.
And we also talked about demonstrating an image of public parks through hosting events to sort of like exemplify what is possible. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. That's a great example. Okay, now let's move away from the physical, the hedging, the lighting, and the physical stuff. Let's move into the social, the second generation SEPDED. Let's start with, let me see, who did I talk to? I talked to the capacity folks. One of the 4 C's is capacity. Who did capacity? Where are you? Mercia? And Peggy, weren't you in that too? Well, do one of you just want to give a shot and tell us a bit about capacity?
Well, we heard it was really hard to come up with these, so we felt better that we struggled a little bit. So basically, it's pretty much like, yeah, exactly how it sounds. So this concept of tipping point, that too little or too much of anything can have an impact on the area, and figuring out balanced land uses and stabilizers to create that safety.
So give me an example of what's too much in an area. How does that cause problems?
So one example that you helped us with, and we were kind of thinking in that Marcia does work with these pathways and I work in a park. So say if we're trying to get kids safely to school and we have a pathway that if you have 100 kids coming down this path, there needs to be a certain width to the path. Also just in work in my park, looking at ways to bring more people into the park, whether that be with volunteers or social gatherings, to create that's like the stabilizing side of it. The balanced land use would be like the pathways,
right, making
sure that they're large enough.
Right, because if the park is empty all the time, then it has a kind of a no man's land, feel to that. Pardon the sexist term there, but you know what I mean. But of isolation, nobody's there, nobody wants to go there. It increases fear. But by activating it with just enough people, to do certain things, you can actually, and that's capacity, to putting enough people so it's balanced. So yeah. Yeah, it's a complex idea, but I was saying to these folks when I went into their team, when you start to think about this tipping point idea about balancing land uses and too many things cause too much of a problem or not enough, you start to see it everywhere. It's one of those things where you'll curse me later on. You can see, oh, I see tipping points everywhere, so, and it's a powerful idea. But I'll leave that with you for now. Okay, who did culture?
I did Belinda with Lebanon.
Okay, and tell us about culture, Belinda. You had a really good
words. So leveraging the cultural value with residents through social engagement and tactics is what the word, but social engagement.
And you had a good downtown example, didn't you?
Yes. So the park that you see the picture of, that is actually the social hub of our neighborhood. It's where if there's going to be a birthday celebration, if somebody gets married and they're going to have the reception afterwards, it's always everybody gathers at this particular park since about the 1950s when it was built. It was built during the civil rights era, and it was built by the entire community. And that cultural heritage, the generation to generation, all of the neighborhood knows about and is very, very invested in. There's never any vandalism or any safety issues that are happening. But with the ideas of particularly building trails in the area, we through this discussion realized that I could do murals and lighting and do murals about these, the people who came before us, these leaders in our community that I know definitely would fit in line and would align perfectly with the culture of the neighborhood and the value that's held by its residents of all ages.
Right. And whereas the image people would talk about doing murals to beautify an area, in culture you do murals, but murals of people who people know, actually historical thing. So you're bringing the pride, the neighborhood pride to the area.
Yes, the actual grandparents and great grandparents of those who live there. Yes.
Right. Much more difficult to tag over, my grandfather's, a mural than just a person who I don't know. The culture has tremendous power. I start most of my SEPTED projects with culture. And partly because I'm a conga player, I do music and I have a band and we play, but also because I believe in the power of food. And if you have a diverse community, people, you have a table and people bring potluck type food, the food's fantastic. People enjoy getting around, and the culture doesn't stop the crime itself like other tactics of SEPTED, but the culture gets folks to know each other and care about each other. And it makes much easier then to do the strategies later on if you start with culture early on in the strategy. So thank you for that, Belinda. Let's move to the next category. Who did connectivity?
That was Grant and I in Chicago.
What is it? Tell us.
Well, we didn't come up with 8 words, did we, Grant? But it's reaching out beyond the group that's working on a particular project. So I think we have one group that's focused on the safe route between the different parks, but Rochelle, who's the chair of our committee, does a great job of also sitting on different committees within the broader coordinating committee in the neighborhood and connecting with a local reporter, Pascal Sabino, who gets articles published in Block Club, which is a local online publication, so more people can know about our work. And we were kind of brainstorming other external to North Lawndale groups that we should be connecting with. And you mentioned Inglewood, so we'd love to follow up with you there and see what strategies they've done. Cicero is a neighboring community that we haven't really talked to about this, but they could benefit from the program too. Right. So kind of looking beyond the group is what we thought connectivity was.
It was, and you're right. It's probably less of a problem for this project than this group of people, because the trail goes by a number of different neighborhoods. So by definition, the trail connects. It is a connective tissue in itself. So less of a factor in this project than in others where there are neighborhoods and parks and so forth. But even here, although a trail is a natural connector, that doesn't necessarily mean that different people along the trail are all connected to each other. Some of them may not stand this trail the impacts of the trail. Or you may not think about if it connects two parks, what's the connection between Park A and Park B? Is there a connection? Is there a festival in the morning here and something there? How are these connected together? The reason why connectivity is important is because if a neighborhood starts to just work on its own project work, or the apartment building starts to just work on its own stuff and sticks to itself, what happens is it gets very inward looking, and it starts to ignore the needs of nearby neighborhoods. And sometimes those neighborhoods have problems too. Sometimes you can learn from them. Sometimes they can contribute. You can do a collaborative project. And so that partnering up of neighborhoods, that partnering up of areas, that's a great, powerful tool in CEPTED. And the way you do that is by thinking about what are the connections. So that's connectivity. And you guys did a great job. Thank you. The last one is for second gen. It's called culture. And who was responsible for that? Or sorry, it was cohesion. Who did cohesion?
That was me and Missy.
Okay. And
so
what is cohesion?
Well, cohesion for me is my entire life, my work life, because I've done everything that's listed in cohesion. I mean, I work for a nonprofit for the past 31 years, right. And we've done all the strategies of community mentoring programs, school-based programs, competency, training. We do it all. But in the community work that I do and putting people together, for years, we've had community events in the parks that are in our community. Like the park that we're working on now, what this grant is for, is Franklin Park. There's an annual picnic every year in that park for the people who live in my neighborhood that we call K-Town. And people who grew up there, they come back every year, no matter where they live in the United States, they travel just for that particular event. For my high school, we do the same thing in a different park on the other side of the community. Right. People come from all over the United States. Some people have moved out of the country and come back just for that day. Wow. For that thing. Also the same thing for my grammar school. I mean, it's a big thing. And we also have other nonprofits where we're doing events at least twice a month, sometimes more, where we all connect. And there's one group that we're working with now that Trevor and Grant and I and Yvonne were working with, called Boxing Out Negativity, which is founded by a guy who went to prison. When he got out of prison, he created this organization to get the youth off the streets. And what they do, bike rides every Friday when the weather's really, really nice. And so they're planning 2 big events this year. One is coming up in 2 weeks. Yeah. Last year we did it. He only expected maybe 100 people to show up. Over 500 people showed up for this event. And they not only came from our community, they came from all over the city of Chicago. And so we're planning even bigger now. We've got the city involved, the police involved. There's like, I don't know how many sponsors from different organizations that we've gotten to come together. So that's what we're doing.
Right.
But we didn't have a word because this was my life.
Yeah, well, that's the word, your life. And that's great examples. And the cohesion bit, I mean, really it's what second generation is trying to say. It's trying to say that when you go to high crime communities and you go to high crime neighborhoods and you go to these crime hotspots where they have a lot of shootings and all these things, when you go to those areas, not always, but very often, what I've discovered is you go there and you talk to folks about, what it's like to live there and how long have they lived there, and they're afraid. They're afraid to come outside. They're afraid to talk to their neighbors. They're afraid to engage because of the fear of being victimized. And when you go to areas that have lower crime rates and get together, you talk to folks, know each other a lot. They get together a lot. They work on things together. So cohesion really is the core of making second generation CEPTED work. And folks get confused over the culture strategy and the cohesion strategy. And the basic difference is, with culture, you're getting to know each other with fun. With cohesion, you're getting together to work on a specific problem. And they're very similar, but they're a little different. One is when I go past a room that it's got some culture folks working on a culture strategy, I look in there and then I I walk across the hall and I look in the room that's got the cohesion folks working on a cohesion strategy. The big thing that I notice the difference is when I look at the cohesion folks and I look at the culture folks, when I look in, they're all smiling because they're talking about food and music and stuff. When I look at the cohesion folks, they're all frowning because they're planning a strategy, you know? It's kind of like that visceral, right? So, but they go together, and that was a nice definition. So thank you for that.
And the one thing, can I just say this? The one thing that, you know, really bothers me is how when people, you know, because I've been a part of surveys for probably 35 years. And one of the things that we learned when I worked on a longitudinal study for child abuse and neglect, we always would ask people how they felt about their neighborhood.
Yeah.
And people would always say they love their neighborhood, no matter how bad it was or how crime-ridden it was.
Right, right.
But the researchers were like, well, how can you love your neighborhood and it's so horrible?
Right, right.
That's a cultural thing.
Yeah, it is.
And so I need people to understand that. That's a cultural thing, no matter what race you are.
Yeah.
If you live in a neighborhood, you love your neighborhood, you love your neighborhood, no matter how horrible the people are. That's your hood, you know?
That's so true. Now, I want to do one thing here, if you don't mind. We've just finished a podcast, our Safe Growth Network. We have a group of people we meet, like I said, we're in different countries, and we do work together. We do publications and so forth. And we just finished a great podcast, and it was done by one of our team members. And she's a formerly trained journalist, actually. And I brought her along today because we want to summarize some of the projects at the end of it and do a little podcast and say, you to tell your stories. And so Callum is here today. And Callum, can you turn your camera on to introduce folks? Where is she? Can't wave at Callum. You got a big light behind you. We can't see you. So just introduce yourself, Callum, and tell them who you are and what you do.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to jump in mid call. So my name is Callum Lyons. So I'm a journalist based out of Vancouver, BC, in Canada. And so I have been working closely with Greg to tell some of the stories of safe growth and learn more about the communities that people have been working in. It's an honor and a privilege for me actually to be able to talk to a lot of the people doing this work because you guys are the ones that know your communities really well. And me being up north, I don't know as much about a lot of those communities myself. So I am looking forward to hopefully speaking to some of you down the road and learning more about the work you're doing, both just in a general context, but also within maybe some of the things you might apply with safe growth. So hopefully, again, in the coming months, I'll be reaching out to some of you to just have a chat. So I think, Greg, I don't know if there's anything else you want me to specifically address.
When she calls you, she's not a spammer. She's with us. She's legitimate, right? And also, not only she's legitimate for this project, but she's legitimate. And so when you listen to the podcast, we'll send it out to you. She did a great job. I mean, she's a journalist who she's trained in safe growth. So she actually knows our methodology and she understands what we're trying to achieve. So it's a journalist who actually has her act together, as opposed to many journalists who get the story wrong. She's not one of them. She's one of the good ones. And she did this great podcast on Philadelphia. We'd done a lot of work in Philly with some of the gang areas and just during the riots last year with the National Guard, and she interviewed some of the folks on our team there and did just a great job. She was with us in Baltimore when we were doing work there. So Callum's been around, she knows her stuff, and when she calls, she's part of us. So just so you know that. So thank you for coming today, Callum. I appreciate that.
And good luck, everyone. I look forward to hearing more about what is to come.
Cool, thank you. Okay, now I promised a break. Can we take a 5-minute break? Is that okay? Tasha, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. We overshot it a little bit, but that's totally fine. We're very excited. Take a break, folks.
Take a break. Take 5 minutes only, and then I'll give you some case studies and show you how it works. So 5 minutes only. So come back at 1:30. Okay? Be sharp. See you then.
Okay. We are 30 minutes past, so get back over here and we will do some final case studies, I think, and then get you out of here at 5 o'clock Eastern or wherever you are.
You're a tough taskmaster, Natasha.
I know. I want to make sure people, somebody's got to do it, Greg.
Yes, that's right. Are we all back? Are we missing anyone?
We have some people off of video, but.
Shall I resume?
Yeah.
Okay, let's resume. So welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being prompt and getting back, and I appreciate your contributions and your interaction and sharing your stories about the different concepts. Those are 8 of them for you. There's more in the handout, as you can see, but basically you're getting a very abbreviated version of the program. We would spend more time in the full program doing this. We have a 3-month program we do. We do 2 days on site with walkabouts and so forth, then practicing the concepts, and then 2 months with a field project where we mentor online with webinars, and then we have 2 more days at the end where we do an advanced workshop and review the reports and so forth. And when Natasha and I were talking about this, we try to compress it, COVID style, to make it palatable. So you're getting a brief form of that. But again, at any point in the future, you want to call me, email, I'm happy to share stories. I'm going to, at the end of this podcast, or at the end of this webinar, I'm going to send to you the podcast that Callum did on the Philadelphia story, and you can get a sense of that. Now that's a particular high crime story. It may not pertain to the kinds of context that you folks have, sorry, but I think it's relevant to see how we put all the pieces together, because we don't do what the old SEPTED folks would do, which is they go in and look at physical lighting and do physics. We don't do it that way. We start with community, and then we build the relationships first, and then we teach the residents to do it so that they're doing it with themselves. So we're not doing it to anybody or for anybody. It's all with, because that's our tree philosophy. So you'll see in the podcast how that works. All right, so let me show you some case studies. I promised you that, so I'm going to do that as soon as I find my sharing button. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, and as Greg gets that up, I just want to flag that Greg and maybe some folks on his team will be joining in July after you guys have turned in your draft plans and have started kind of thinking through this stuff and using your assessment. And that will be a time that you guys can just have some time to kind of go back and forth and discuss. And so it's built into the timeline. Just
okay.
To look forward.
Okay, so let's share the screen here. And you should have here where we left off was, how does SEPTED actually work? And we did our cooperative learning exercise, and you share your learning with other folks in the group. And let's give you some examples now. So you asked about natural surveillance, and I said, how do you do natural surveillance? It's that's more collaborative and so forth. So here's an example from Portland, Oregon, and it's a busy street in Portland and it's along a walkway, actually, a well-traveled movement predictor, where there's always been a lot of problems with bicycle thefts, because they have a lot of bikes in the West Coast. Some of you may know that, and bikes are a form of transport and they're a form of leisure and so forth. But when you get a bike stolen, that's a big deal. I mean, bikes nowadays, not like when I was a kid, bikes nowadays can be, well, how much, thousands of dollars. So it's a major thing. But the police aren't going to spend a lot of time looking for stolen bikes. I'll tell you that right now in most communities. And so you're out, right? And it's your insurance company, the insurance rates go up, and all that nastiness. And it's not not thought of as a serious violent crime, but it is a crime. And so the folks there are trying to get a handle on this. What they realized was the bikes are stolen when they park them to go into stores. And what they realized was there were stores there in which people were watching the street all the time, and they were like coffee shops. And so what they did was they convinced the town to give 2 parking spots, which was a major battle in itself, by the way, fighting the traffic crowd. But they won. They eventually won. And you got these 2 traffic spots, and they put these yellow stanchions around a secure area and made like what they call a bike corral. And the beauty part about this is they put it right next to a coffee shop and an ice cream shop. And what was happening was a lot of the folks who were, who put the bikes there were having coffee in the coffee shop, and the coffee shop turned its tables and turned its chairs to face outwards. So now you have folks watching out the windows at their own bikes. And anybody who's looking to steal it know that they're at risk because they're being watched. And so there's an easy example of natural surveillance that cost hardly any money, took a little bit of a battle with town hall, but it really cut the bike theft rate down significantly just by doing that one simple natural surveillance strategy. Okay, here's another one. Now this is an alleyway, which are one of our notorious areas where we have a lot of problems, where folks are going from point A to point B. Sometimes kids go there to school. Here's this elderly lady, and she's trying to navigate her way along this back alleyway where the garbage, because this is where they collect utilities and garbage and trash. And so, naturally there's going to be trash all over the place, and it's going to look messy. There's no lights, as you can see. There are not very many, and there's no territorial control there. I mean, it could be anybody could be there, and so she's uncomfortable. She doesn't want to walk down there. There's been crimes down there, and so the question is, how do you transform this kind of a space using better image, for example? And the answer for some communities is you pass ordinances and bylaws, and you make sure that they're taken care of. So here's what they do in Vancouver, Canada, where Callum is from. They actually activate the back alleyways. Now they still have to figure out the trash collection, so that doesn't go away. So you still have some trash and whatnot, but by having things there that are colorful, and there's mural color programs, there's the image program, there's space activation, by making this more interesting, you make it more difficult for offenders to offend with impunity. And it's simple that you're not going to go there if people are enjoying the space. Plus, it makes it more fun as a movement predictor, which is what you folks are working on. So there's another example of image. Here's a classic story where you have, the classic movement predictor is a sidewalk, right? And the sidewalk has, I'm not sure. Can you see my cursor there, Natasha? If I move my cursor? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So
yes, I can.
So this is in Phoenix. And so here's your sidewalk, here's your little boulevard area, grass area, here's the telephone poles, here's the sidewalk, and here's the private property. Now, one of the things you learn about in SEPTED when we take the full course is you learn that territorial control means breaking space down from public to private. And we usually try to create an area like a semi-private and a semi-public area. And by buffering it, you make it a bit safer for folks on both sides. Well, here there's no buffer because the fences essentially make private space right to here and public space right to here. So there's a hard edge between the private and the public. And wherever you have hard edges, crime tends to cluster along those hard edges. So the question is, what do you do with this? And of course, you have this boulevard area, and I don't know what you call this area in your communities, but this little grass area here, where a lot of dogs poop, where nobody wants to walk. I mean, these are grotty areas. They're not cared. It's not cared for. Look, the grass is overgrown, and it's just not pleasant, and it doesn't really serve a function. It's supposed to be to make it greener, but it doesn't work. They don't maintain it properly, the rest of it. So the question is, what do you do about this high crime corridor? Well, in Portland, what they do, so there's the walkway. Okay, there's the boulevard. And the question, what do you do with it? Well, here's what they do in Portland. What they do in Portland is you have the same thing. You still have the walkway, but the boulevard is now activated by these growing areas, these growing gardens out there, mini gardens. And there's no big whoop to this, okay? This is simply a public space, which is owned by the city, that the city has said to the owner, you can have this to plant your garden stuff. As a matter of fact, I think they had a program where some of the local gardening communities, a connectivity strategy where they got the gardening association to go out and run some garden classes and provide some seeds and this kind of thing, training and education to bring people together. But by getting the folks to look after that space, it meant a couple of things. One, it meant the folks could grow some cool things, foods and whatnot. I think they're growing, I don't know what those are, some kind of green collards or whatever, and here's some probably pumpkins or whatever. I don't know much about this stuff, but anyway, but the beautiful part about this is that now the owners of the property come out, or the renters of the property come out, and they walk here to do a little bit of gardening. So now they're seeing one another. So now you're building some cohesion because they're getting to know each other. And not only that, but they're actually on the street. So here you see some of these cars are actually the sight lines. The natural maintenance isn't very good because of those trees are kind of starting to block the cars. But guess what? People are out there so often. the negative natural surveillance here is counteracted by the activity of the space by those gardens. And so you actually counteract the impact of poor natural surveillance there by getting folks to activate in the space and make it easier to walk, more fun to walk, make the car safer. And so there's an example of place activation. Okay. Here's what they do. This is actually also, it started in Portland. It's called the neighborhood, what's it called? The Intersection Repair Program, or the City Repair Program. And this started years ago when they had a young girl who was knocked over by, who's on a bike, and she was knocked over by a car. And I actually think she was killed, but it was quite a tragedy 10, 20 years ago. And so a bunch of folks got together, headed by an architect in Portland named Mark Lakeman, who is part of our team, our friends. He's a friend of our Safe Growth Network. And Mark is a really interesting architect. And his whole thing was, how do we activate a neighborhood intersection? Because there's all kinds of walkways past here and nobody pays attention to it, and everybody speeds through the intersection. You know, they would put up stop signs, people blew the stop signs, the cops would sit in the corner and give out tickets, but that didn't make a difference. So what they did in Portland was they realized, let's activate the neighborhood with not only with color and good image, and good access control and good, you know, hedging and whatnot, but make it a place where people want to go. So here's a little tea station where they have, you know, a little solar collector where they heat the tea, and over here's a little bookstore, and they painted the intersection beautiful. So now people walk with their dogs and they feel like it's part of their neighborhood. And because they all contributed together to doing the painting on the street, and it's trying to make it beautiful. And the city traffic department was, you know, they hated this idea at the start, and you can't do that. And you know, what happens when the paint wears out? And they go, well, what happens when the paint wears out now? I mean, you guys, it takes you 2 years to come here to repaint it. So we'll repaint this every year, because we'll have a festival every year. We repaint it every year. So this has been 20 years now. It's in 70 different neighborhoods in Portland. It's in a dozen different cities. So here's another way of place activation using septet strategies to make your walkways safer. Okay, so here's an apartment building. This is starting our case study. So here's an apartment building, and this is where you have these little things here are the windows. It's a 20-story building. There's entrances here, and here's the end of the building. There's a cement sort of wall and an emergency exit here, but no windows, and then there's windows here and cement and emergency and so forth. So this is your apartment structure here, and these dots represent your crime analysis. So they actually asked about crime, which is part of your analysis that you should do when you're doing your walkabouts. Is you're trying to get a sense of where's crime happening and what kinds of crime are happening. So here you have a parking lot here where you have cars being broken into and vandalism to the automobiles over in the parking lot. And over here, the people are coming here, and at nighttime they're walking into this door, not the main door, because this is maybe their apartments here, and it's a shorter entranceway, and people are actually getting assaulted. So you have two kinds of crime types. You have a crime type over here and a crime type over here. And I was going to spend some time asking you about this, but we're short, so I'll just kind of give you the skinny on it. The skinny was, what do you do about this and what do you do about that? Well, the septet response is you open up the sight lines here. They wanted to put cameras in, but what they did instead is they activated these spaces. And down here, these are all happening at nighttime. They simply closed the door and they made them go to the front door instead. And there was better natural surveillance here and better lighting. And so by taking them away from the risky spot, they tried to improve the situation. So here's the actual building itself. And so you'll see that there's the parking lot. And what they did was they activated with a basketball court and a play area for kids over here to activate the space with better lighting. And the assault area here, they put murals in here, they put a community garden here, and they're trying to turn it around. And so this case study is called the San Romanoway building. And it started 20 years ago, and it's in North Toronto. It's one of the highest crime neighborhoods in the city, 125 times higher crime rate. And so they had to do something about the problem. And so there's your crime maps. Each of your communities where you are, usually the police will publish these online or publish them, to the community. Or if you call them and ask, can we get some crime data? They often provide that. I know they do in Chicago and some other cities. So we can talk about that later as to how you get crime data and so forth. But essentially, here's a crime map for Toronto. The darkest area here is where the crime clusters, and you can see our area is right in the center of the high crime area. So we need to do something now, right? The septet strategies we choose need to be immediate, and they need to be powerful, as opposed to doing something over here. We have low crime, so maybe you can just do some shrubbery hedging and something like. So your strategies depend on your crime context, right? Well, here we have a lot of crime. And the first thing they did was cohesion. they organized themselves into an association. It's still going 20 years later. It's called the San Romano Revitalization Association. And they get programs, they get social programs and programs for kids and education programs and sports programs, music for kids who want to do rap and so forth. And so the community itself runs this association. So they're in charge. They're running the show. And here are some of the things they've done. Here's the mural I talked about. Here's the children's play area where they have for the kids. When moms want to go shopping, they want some daycare. Here's a garden area where I talked about earlier, where they're using gardening like they did in Portland, only here it's quite a large garden. Here's a cultural program where they're doing photography exhibits and that kind of thing. And here's where the locals, now here's where connectivity plays a role. So they talk to the local cinemas, and the cinemas go, we have some philanthropic funds available. We can help you with stuff. And if we're seen as a good corporate citizen, you'll come to the movies and use our theater. What if we help set up a multi-purpose room, with some of our Odeon cinema logos and stuff like that? So they help set up a multi-purpose room inside the apartment buildings to give the kids a place to go. And this helps build the cohesion through connectivity. Here's a park area where the kids can play. And this was a great story. So here was this actually is across the road. This is a basketball / parking lot / whatever. It's all run down. It's not used. Our property was exactly the same back in the day. So what they did was they installed some tennis courts. All the young girls they were emulating Venus and Serena Williams because they were their heroes, right? Because of course they were stars. They were world-class stars. And they wanted to emulate their heroes. And so they wanted some tennis courts. So they got some funding from the Tennis Association, and they built a couple of professional tennis courts. And the local college came with athletes to teach tennis camps and things like this. And then one year for the tennis camps, who showed up to open the tennis camp but Serena Williams, who came right out to the site. And this was a great sort of a morale booster to the kids who then saw this not as a high crime neighborhood. Now it was something to be proud of. Now they were culturally proud of it, and their crime was plummeting like crazy. And so these are the kinds of strategies you can bring. That is the local newspaper story about turning a rundown high rise into a community hub. The kinds of things you can do with all the CPTED together, the natural surveillance, the activation of the place, the image, all together by putting these things in the ingredients of a soup that tastes great, as opposed to a soup that's has nothing in it. That's the strategy. Okay, here's the second case study. This is in New Orleans, a neighborhood.
I don't know if it's just me or I'm off your video.
Okay, hang on. Give me a second.
Okay, I don't know. Are other people?
I think it might be you, Natasha, because when you started talking, your audio started cutting out. I don't have a problem.
I'm glad that it's okay. Perfect.
Oh, okay.
Good. Then it's not you, Greg. It's me. Sorry.
Oh, is everybody else okay?
Yeah, we're fine.
Oh, okay. So Natasha, get with it. Okay. Then I will continue with the second story. The second story is in New Orleans, and New Orleans. I love New Orleans. I love the food. I love the culture. I love the parties. Love the music. But it's notoriously for having very, very high crime neighborhoods. Holly Grove was one of those neighborhoods at the time. Back in the day, this was one of the centers for jazz. It was a great cultural neighborhood. It was an antebellum African American neighborhood that had tremendous culture up until about the 30s and 40s, when the economy changed, the job market changed, and they started to have a lot of crime and gangs and shootings. And by the time of the storm, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, there was terrible shooting situations, gang violence. It's where the rapper Lil Wayne used to do a lot of his rap about this neighborhood. This was his neighborhood. So it was a disaster. And after the storm, there's some of the houses that were abandoned because of the flooding and the mold and so forth. So it was a disaster. And they decided to rebuild it, but instead of rebuilding it so we had more crime coming back and gangs, they decided to take charge of it. And so what they did was they got together and they started to do CPTED and safety programs. And we got the residents together with the local church members, and there's a local police officer, and they're all working as a team, and they're auditing the neighborhood. They're using what's called a safety audit. And you now got our Safe Growth safety audit in your emails. And the safety audit is based on SEPTED. And you recognize the safety audit questions because they have access control and surveillance. And now you know what that means. And so when you go through the audit, it'll ask you those questions. And so they're going around their neighborhood of Holly Grove and auditing to see what are the problems in this neighborhood, what are the problems in this part of the neighborhood. So on a trail, for example, let's say 1,500 yards or 2,000 yards, you'd probably do 2 or 3 or 4 safety audits along the trail. And so here they're doing a dozen or so safety audits. It'll take you a couple hours, so it's a time-consuming thing, but it's so powerful because it gives you a lot of great data. And what they were able to do is identify hotspots. And one of the things they discovered was by getting residents themselves to have an input into what they want to do with their own neighborhood by designing, and that doesn't have to be fancy, but just to get some ideas down so they're all working on from the same playbook. And so here was one of the hotspots they identified. It's a bus stop along a walkway. Well, you wouldn't know, but that's actually a sidewalk that's been destroyed by the rains of the storm. The bus stop sign doesn't have a time, so you never know when the bus is coming. It's all been graffitied. There's no lighting there. So of course, this is one of the crime hotspots where people are victimized. And one of the first things the residents decided to do was to tackle this hotspot specifically. And they thought, why don't we have a bus stop? Why don't we make a proper bus stop? The bus company wasn't playing ball because they were dysfunctional. So the residents got together and got some architecture students from the school, some students, and they found out where they could find recycled materials. They got a bit of history together. They did a couple design choices, and they actually built their own bus stop. And that's it. And I mean, it's their own property. It belongs to them. They're not tagging it. It's been 10 years. They haven't tagged it yet. But it's an interest to their neighborhood to say, we are proud of our neighborhood. We're culturally doing something that's about us. And, and this is our contribution. And it started the ball rolling of not only placemaking along these walkways, but getting folks to work together. And it went from the bus stop to walking programs. I think somebody in the team here mentioned that they had an ambassador program to take care of their trails. There's also walking programs for health. In this case, it's seniors and families doing walking at certain times of the day, walking the trail. So you're activating the trail at quiet times as a crime prevention strategy. The lighting was awful. The city wouldn't put money together for street lights. So the residents went out, and we didn't recommend this, by the way. This is just, they saw natural surveillance. They want to improve the lighting at night because nighttime is when you have to do some of the audits. And the city wouldn't make lights available. So they developed a political strategy. Now this is a connectivity strategy, and I'm not recommending you become political here, but maybe I am, I don't know. And they decided to do the politics. And what they decided to do was go out to a Walmart, put their money together. And this is a poor neighborhood. They don't have a lot of money to spare, but they fundraised, got some money, went to like a Walmart, bought a spotlight, climbed the local pole, and attached the spotlight pointing into a crime hotspot. Now, this is not good, right? Because this is not the spec. First rain, it's going to probably short up. But what they did the next day was they called the media, and they got the journalists involved. And the media came down, and the cameras came, and they photographed. And the story in the headlines was like, residents in poor neighborhood have to, put their own lighting up because the city doesn't care. And I mean, of course, within 4 or 5, 6 months, guess what happened? The city started to install streetlights through the entire neighborhood. And they could take this down. So they politically activated themselves, but they also improved their lighting at the same time. So they put two things in one. Here's one of the Kaboom Park with children play areas by placing it in areas that were empty. The no man's land syndrome. They actually activated it with a children's play area. With all the Kaboom equipment that's kid friendly and all that sort of thing. And then this was a powerful strategy. They took the garden idea and they made it an urban farm. And the Holly Grove urban farms would sell produce and bring money back to the neighborhood by activating the farm. And of course, that transformed the neighborhood and made it a whole different place. So those are my case studies. SEPTED works in real life. That's how you apply the strategies. And I did want to give you a moment to ask some questions because I think there were some questions. And if we have time, we can look at the safety audit. So let me stop there. Ask you, are there any questions? Natasha, did you have anything you wanted to end off with before we end off?
No major questions on my end, folks. Feel free to drop something in the chat box or unmute yourself if you have any questions.
No? I do have a question.
Okay.
Okay, in those, and thank you for presenting those beautiful pictures. In those cases where they had to deal with the municipalities, at any point in time, the residents look at other communities within their same city and use that evidence to really push the city to get what
Absolutely.
they needed.
Yep. You know what? You nailed it. That's exactly what they did. And as a matter of fact, we just wrote the Holly Grove story we published it in a journal. As a documented, so we had to document it because nobody there was going to write this up. So we actually documented it. And the pastor, who was we just dragged him out of the church, and he joined the team because this was a very sort of religious community. I think it's Baptist. And Kevin Brown, that was the pastor, and Kevin actually decided to do his doctorate on this program and that teaches at the university now. And so he was one of the ones who motivated them. And what they did was they said, now that we know how to work together, now that we know how to activate, now that we know how to govern ourselves with some of these problems, we can do other things as well. And about 5 years after we left Holly Grove, and I haven't been back for 10 yeyears, 5 years after we left there, the city council decided to install some new rail lines and increase the hazardous material trains and the gas trains to the edge of the neighborhood, which of course would affect everybody negatively. It was hazardous, materials and with children in the neighborhood and louder noise. And now it's, the values are going to go down. And so the residents got together and they actually made a program about stopping this, and they went to City Hall and they brought the media because now they're activated and they could work with neighborhoods around them as one big group. And they went to City Hall and they hammered them. That whole program was stopped dead in its tracks, pardon the pun. And so, yeah, they do a lot of collaborative stuff now with their neighbors because they now know that they have to do that. And some of the neighborhoods across New Orleans, like the Garden District, where they didn't have these problems, when you saw the amount of money they got from the council and then the crimes, the residents just brought that, they used that as statistical data to say, it's our turn here. So yeah, it's a very powerful political strategy. And safe growth is, and that's not so much accepted, it's more safe growth. It's activating neighbors. So I'm a big believer in that.